To today's Zinc webcast entitled How Zinc Improves Employee Engagement at BioTek. My name is Nicole Sanders, and I'm going to be moderating today's event. So before I introduce our speakers, I want to cover just a few logistics. Our webcast today is scheduled just to go about 30 minutes. If the timing goes as planned, we'll be answering questions at the end. You can ask questions during the presentation using the Q&A panel, which is part of the GoToWebinar panel there on the right-hand side of your screen. You can submit those questions throughout the presentation. We're also recording today's event, and we will provide a link out to everybody in the next 24 hours. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us. This is the third in our series of webcasts around communication and the fact that communication is elemental. We wanted to take the opportunity to have one of our customers tell their story, to explain how they've used Zinc to change the communication landscape at their company, as oftentimes many of you like to understand how our company's using the technology. So we're really happy to have with us today Sean Jordan. He's the Director of Service at BioTek Instruments. And presenting along with Sean is Zinc's Chief Product Officer, John Steadick, who will provide a little bit more detail about the communication analytics and how the technology is helping enable the BioTek team. So Sean, you want to say a quick hello?
Hi, everybody. Service Director BioTek, been doing the role for probably 8 years. Most before that, Lean Six Sigma background. And when I talk about service, our organization, we're responsible for field service. So we install products for the customer, train the customer, do all the maintenance and repairs. We have depot service. We have service contracts, parts, tech support centers. We also have documentation and engineers working on that for our teams. And the biggest part, of course, is training. We're responsible for training our own employees as well as the service representatives for our distribution network. So there's a whole gamut that we do locally and worldwide.
Great, thanks, Sean. Hi, everyone. Yeah. This is John Steadick here, Chief Product Officer at Zinc. I am excited to be able to talk to you a little bit about some evolving features that we have at Zinc, and also talking with Sean about how they're leveraging some of those capabilities. I actually came to Zinc from being a user. I had a very large and distributed team across 11 different development centers, and my last organization was actually a user of Zinc myself. And I actually saw some of the transformative nature of Zinc and the way that it enables teams to communicate, to really bring together large distributed organizations. So I'm really excited to share with you and also hear a little bit more from Sean today. So let's just start off talking about really the problem that we're trying to solve. We focus really exclusively on deskless workers. How can we make people who are out at the point of sale, out at the point of service, more effective in their ways to communicate? And some of the needs that these people have is the communication needs to be real time. They're out doing a job. They need to get information, they need to get questions answered, they need to be able to solve a customer's problem or solve a problem that they're working on, and be able to then move on with the actual task at hand. And of course, since they're on the go, mobile first is essential. It needs to be a system that is easily consumed on small form factors on a mobile device, and can really just be a quick hit of information and get them back at their job. What's also important is that conversation happens across lots of different ways, and you pick up different types of conversation for the context of that conversation that you're actually having, or the environment that you're in. If you're driving somewhere, you're going to pick up the phone call, or you're going to pick up the phone and call someone. If you've got to bang off a quick message, but you're sitting in somewhere where you can't be talking, you might send out a text message for that. So the mode of conversation, or the mode of communication that you use, is driven by context as well as the environment that you're actually in. And of course, being able to enable the field workers to connect back with the office, not only be able to connect with their own team, but be able to connect back with people in the office and be able to have information shared quickly across the organization is so critical. And then on top of that, being able to have this really powerful communication platform that can be actually managed at an enterprise level and centrally managed by corporate is really important, because what it does is it starts to standardize the communication mechanisms that people are using. It reduces the hodgepodge of tools that people use, and really allows you to adopt better best practices and standards for how teams actually communicate. And the challenge that we see specifically with a deskless employee is that they're out trying to get their job done. And there's lots of people that are trying to communicate to them. And they also at times need to communicate to lots of people in order to get their jobs actually done. And of course, there's a whole variety of different channels that they could use to communicate. And people are bombarding them with information from all sorts of different channels. But ultimately, what's really interesting is 50% of employees claim a lack of information management is actually a barrier to do their work, to doing their work. So for those of you in management and leadership, you know you want to be able to be communicating out to your team. But for the deskless worker who's out on the go and it sometimes has information coming from them from a bunch of different channels, you need to streamline that information flow to be able to make sure they get information that's relevant to them at the time they need it, and in a consumable way that they can then use quickly to drive on with their job. So if we look at some of the numbers here in a recent survey that we've done, is 98, really essentially almost 100% of many deskless workers today actually claim that a communication application is important to getting their work done. When we look at the population of the workforce in North America today, over 70% of workers are deskless workers. They're in service industries, they're doing machine maintenance, they're in hospitality, they're in communications, they're in transportation, people that are not behind a desk to actually do their job. And many of them, almost 100%, actually use some sort of app today to be able to drive communication. And actually, a lot are using it quite frequently. So close to 40% are communicating with 20 plus coworkers per day, and actually close to 70% prefer texting as a means of communication. Texting can be a really effective way to be able to ask a quick question, get a quick response, while you can go out, do something else while you're waiting for that response. Then further to that, the deskless worker has actually adopted mobile communication and communication apps for a lot longer than a lot of corporate users have. So over 80% of deskless workers have been using some sort of mobile communication app for over 3 years, whereas that same number of 80%, that only happened within the last year. Now, the really interesting thing when it comes to engaging with your deskless workforce is that 71% of all people surveyed, not just deskless workers, say that they do use email to communicate. Where the challenge is, though, only 41% of deskless workers feel informed. So you have this broad workforce out there with lots of information coming at them. They're busy trying to get their job done and don't have time to consume the information that's being sent to them, and therefore they feel less informed about their job. They're less engaged in what they're doing, and they don't necessarily feel that when they communicate back to headquarters that there's someone there that's going to be able to connect back and share information and give them the answers they need, or they feel disconnected with their teams themselves, and so they can't rely on peer-to-peer support like people traditionally do in an office environment. So that's really where Zinc comes in as an all-mode communication platform. We bring all these different modes of communication, whether it's phone calls, messaging, video calling, bringing them all into one single application that can be managed from the enterprise, very, very easy to use, very easy to learn. And then what's really interesting about it, and this is some new functionality that we're just coming out with, is being able to actually drive some really interesting analytics on the back end. So then management and leadership can really start to better understand what's going on out in the field. So let me just give you some examples. These conversational analytics can be really powerful. You can start to measure your communication activities and actually optimize processes. We all know that communication is the thing that kind of drives processes forward, but it's one of those things that we never measure. We measure our processes, but never the communication associated with it. Now with communication analytics, you can actually see who's talking to who, how frequently, when do they do it in the day. How can we then better optimize processes to either remove the need for certain communication touch points or be able to give people more information in order to be able to do their job? Being able to track across different types of usage, for example, finding out how people are actually communicating, understanding what are the primary modes that different people like to communicate. What cost savings could you be offsetting by using a unified platform so then you don't have people spending money across different communication mechanisms? So this type of insight allows you to make some really smart business decisions. Being able to see who's talking. For example, this chart here gives you a graph of different people in an organization split up by different teams. And you'll see the different roles actually communicate differently. You can see the operations managers and the field service managers communicate more frequently than the rest of the people on the team. That's because the operations managers and the field managers are the hubs of information, and so they're sending out lots of information. Whereas the green here, which in this case these are field technicians, are people that are actually consuming the information. So when you know who's talking, you can start to understand, what roles use the platform more. How does usage vary across roles? What kind of best practices can we learn from different teams? Then being able to know what people are actually talking about. So being able to drill in to see which conversations are popular within the organization, being able to find grassroots conversations that people have started up and what topics they're interested in actually discussing, and how frequent people are talking about any given topic. So this gives you a whole nother level of insight as to what's going on out in the field. Then when you start to communicate at scale, you can end up with some really interesting visualizations that starts to show you how your group is communicating. This is an interesting chart generated as sample data here are very similar to how some of our customers use Zinc, where each dot is a person that is communicating back and forth. Each line between it is a message that's sent back and forth. The thicker the line, the more communication that's actually going on. And so you can see all sorts of different patterns that start to give you insight into how different teams are actually communicating. And the final thing that I want to end off with here is we're talking a lot about real-time communication and team communication, how people can share information through phone calls, through messaging, and be able to talk back and forth to each other. That's only part of the need of a communication platform. The other part is how can corporate and how can management broadcast out information to field workers in a really consumable fashion, so field workers feel more informed of what's going on back at headquarters. And so by being able to use Zinc Broadcast, you can actually broadcast out short, concise pieces of information, which can link back to deeper pieces of information if you want to. And you can really start to drive engagement, because now you're delivering short, consumable messages that get presented. You can see right here on the screen that get presented right in front of the user. You can actually then have them consume that. They have to read it before they can move on. And then the beauty of it is that you actually get analytics on the back end that allow you to see what's the open rate, what's the click-through rate, so you can understand how people are actually engaging with that content. So that gives you a little bit of a flavor of the types of problems that Zinc is trying to solve and the unique ways that we're solving it by delivering an all-mode communication platform that allows you to seamlessly communicate across teams, be able to broadcast information out to them, and be able to have conversation analytics that can change the way that you think about your business. So let's actually hear how that's used in the real world. So Sean, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Fantastic. So as a point of reference, everyone, just want to let you know, BioTek, we're headquartered in Vermont. We're not too far from Canada. This is the city of Burlington. It's, in my opinion, almost like utopia. It's a fantastic place. If you just go up the waterfront, a couple miles down the hill, we're the next town over in Winooski, but where that little yellow arrow is pointing just on the backside, that's where we're at. We're about almost a 50-year-old family-owned company. We're very successful in life science instrumentation manufacturing, and this is where we're at. So this is the center of the world for us as a global company, headquartered all the way out of Vermont. So if that's ground zero, here we are. We are a global company. This is the locations of our sales and service offices. These are direct offices. If we don't have a presence in that country, we have a strong distribution network everywhere else. So it's pretty vast. And my mission, my role for service, really encompasses the processes, the engagement, helping develop business and all the other service centers around the world, and also helping our distributors. And my mission, I want to make sure every employee can be successful. I think that's a key ingredient for success, is a really positive workplace culture. And I'm always thinking about, how do I sustain this fantastic, vibrant service culture we have here in my group with BioTek worldwide? And you can see with so much geography, it's kind of hard to make this global community still feel local. We do training. I think pretty much every international service employee has come to our office here in Vermont, even some of our distributors. So we're trying to do that. And when I was brainstorming things about a little over 2 years ago, two colleagues and I stumbled across Zinc at a trade show. And we're like, yeah, let's just try it out, see what happens. During a coffee break, we threw on the app, started playing with it. we had ideas of how Zinc could really kind of help our organization. And then I said, okay, sounds good. Maybe let the field team try it out, see what happens, because we thought maybe it's going to help them with the timely response they're really looking for, so we can give them better support with real immediate situations they have at the customer site. So, and a lot of you guys can probably relate that field service employees are really good at sorting out the tools or processes that don't exist or don't add value. And so we don't play with it. Some messages took place. And they started playing with it, had some groups, and then I had my JAWS moment. If you haven't seen JAWS, it's a classic. After this webinar, go see it. Rent it, stream it, I don't care. Heck, come to my house, we'll watch it. Bring your own food, because I'm sure my teenage sons have pretty much eaten all the food in the house already. So that being said, there's a moment. But it wasn't a sense of fear. You know, when Zinc had analytics, I checked it out, I was like, wow, this is pretty exciting. Now I actually visualized what was going on. So in the beginning, just like in JAWS, we were chumming, right? We tried this out, gave it to the field team, and this is monthly messages going out. I'm like, okay, that's kind of cool. And I could see messages going across as I'm looking at Zinc, either on my phone or my desktop at work. No big deal. And for a while, I think I was probably the biggest user trying to stimulate momentum. And then I started seeing a lot of messages, right? And I'm like, all right, so maybe it's taken off. Well, then I saw this graph, right? And then I was like, wow, something jumped. What was it? And this was fantastic. You know, we're talking thousands of messages. And it jumped up to 6x, and now it's kind of normalized. And I was trying to figure out what happened, really, what created this engagement. And part of it was because we started making more groups. We started, instead of being it just based on the org chart, right? Like, okay, here's a group just for the field team. Here's the one just for the team in Vermont. Here's one for all of our domestic users. Then we said, oh, what if we started doing it by product type? So people had specific questions. And so we did a cross-section of all kinds of groups, whether it was region, product, audience. We have some stuff that is based on immediate need, right? We created this thing called, it's like the bat phone. We call it Save My Bacon. If anyone sees that in the service org, you know someone needs help ASAP and someone's going to answer it. If we don't, we drag someone out of their desk to go answer it. So we take care of it. And that's really helped drive the business impact for our customers on, you know, further increasing first-time resolution fixes, you know, really improving customer satisfaction even higher for us, which has been great. But, you know, we're really helping our field teams. And we've done it with, you know, sharing photos, documents. Occasionally there's a video in the field, what's going on. And I think our users appreciate that because now they're getting more collaboration. You know, we have a great culture, but we have another tool to say, hey, I have an immediate need, and now we're responding even faster. That's bringing people closer together. And like I said, you know, we're trying to do this worldwide. So I have users in other parts of the world who are now getting a faster response. You know, instead of trying to email the U.S. and wait for a response, it's kind of cool to wake up in the morning and all of a sudden I see a message that came out from Switzerland that was answered in Korea, or someone on the West Coast had a question, and all of a sudden the guys from the UK are answering. It's kind of neat to see this going on back and forth between my teams. It's really exciting. And then another reason for the jump, again, culture and engagement. These are formal groups. Employees have the ability to create their own groups. I only have 9 formal groups for the service org. We have over 50 total. So my employees are generating all kinds of stuff. It could be work-related. Some of it's social. I mean, we have ones like called Deep Thoughts, right? So if you got non sequiturs you want to throw out, that's fantastic. It's also not junk email anymore. So those are great. There's a Game of Thrones group, you name it. When the hurricane came through Texas, we were using it to check on our field engineer in Houston. You know, Zinc's been used in a lot of different ways I never really thought about. But once again, it just shows how our team is really engaging with each other in a different channel that we never had before. It's pretty cool to see that. So, you know, it's been pretty valuable for our team. And I think that we've even done things where where's a good learning opportunity? So we take the analytics. We think, oh, what group's been used the most? Let's go through that. Oh, look at this technical question that's been used multiple times. Ooh, maybe that's for our next service training. We should incorporate some of those things. So just another way we can take the analytics and the conversations and really help more improvements in our service org. So it's pretty much it in a nutshell. I could go on forever, but it's only a half-hour webinar, so I'm going to hand it back over to you, John, if you have any questions.
Yeah, that's great. So, thanks, Sean. And actually, you ended off there at just the perfect point of being able to go in and actually look at the conversations and say, oh, what are the things that are actually commonly being talked about here? And that actually takes me to our future of where are we going with this concept of conversational analytics? And this is now starting to look at contextual analytics. How can we actually tell what is going on within the conversations, so key topics and key challenges can actually be surfaced up to management? Because as you all know, especially in a distributed team, little issues happen and they sort of bubble around in their own little local area, and sometimes they get escalated, sometimes they don't, or it's a pain and it gets escalated, but people aren't really necessarily listening. By being able to actually plug into the stream of what's actually going on right at the field, it gives managers great insight to what's actually happening at the field. For those of you that have ride-along programs, for example, for management, where you can get out there and be working with someone and see their day-to-day life, it's just such an eye-opener and such an insight for what actually happens at the front lines. And so what we want to do, and part of that is to be able to take the conversation from the front lines and surface those key themes and conversations, so then you can make more effective choices in your business, whether it's about evolving some sort of training, or addressing a process issue, or taking something that your teams are really finding challenging and just making it easier for them. So that's a little bit about where we're going with the future of conversation analytics. Now, we want to open things up to questions here, and I thought, Sean, you brought up a really interesting point about those social groups that you had, and when I was a user of Zinc myself, and this is where I really found some interesting value on it. We used it when there were really business critical things that were happening, and we all needed to jump on and solve a problem. But there were also groups where people were sharing pictures of their kids when they're dressed up for Halloween. And that seems like a weird thing to get excited about when you think about business communication. But what it really did for a remote team was build community and build that engagement. And for employees, especially field people that are out working by themselves a lot of the time, building those relationships is also really powerful. Of course, being able to serve the customer is really, really important, but those relationships and that engagement is really, really critical too. So we've got a couple things here just off of some of the themes that you were talking about. Do you find, Sean, that different people get drawn out in different formats? Like maybe there's people that are quiet during phone calls, but maybe they're active on Zinc. Have you noticed anything in the analytics that have been able to see how different people engage?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the volume of messages per person, and you'll find out that I was really surprised. There's people who are maybe perhaps more introverted than other people who I engage with, but it's where I don't see them engaging as much in the environment here in the office. But when I looked at the analytics, like, holy cow, this person is now like the third highest user of the group. So that's great. So they're having a lot of conversations back and forth. I'm not sure which ones they are, but it doesn't matter. I know that they're really engaged with the team. It's always nice to see a new member of the team who is really working with their colleagues, which is fantastic.
Yeah, that's great.
So I really enjoy that piece of saying, wow, these people are really getting engaged and they're having a good time, sharing stuff. And I'll see it. There's actually probably some employees I have more Zinc conversations with than I have face-to-face, whether it's because of geography or just because our days are so busy. I don't get to spend as much face-to-face time with them, but we're communicating. And there's some folks, let's face it, in social media, a lot of people are passive. They're not going to always engage, but all this information is going back and forth, especially the technical and the troubleshooting and product-related stuff. It's a learning opportunity for them. They're reading all this. They may not be contributing, but they're learning it, especially for maybe even our team overseas. They're reading the conversations and troubleshooting going back and forth, saying, oh, I'm going to save that because I never thought about that troubleshooting step before. So there's a lot of that going on too. So even though we have thousands of messages going on every month, they're being read by everybody. And I know people just saving that knowledge, which is fantastic.
Okay, great. And also then, as you roll people out internationally, as you're expanding, have you guys done anything now to kind of build in that onboarding process for people, where Zinc becomes part of that process now? Like how do new people get added into the system and sort of get onboarded into how to use this as a new way of communicating?
Right. So as we've brought on new groups, what we'll do is it's usually during an event. Like, so we have multiple events throughout the year worldwide, so I'll be face-to-face with them and be like, okay, great, guys, we're going to introduce this tool. I've already signed you up, and I have usually a getting started guide and some basic expectations of how to use it, and we'll just walk through it, and all of a sudden, I'll do an introduction maybe on Zync in a group, say, hey, you'll see when someone joins a group. And it's kind of cool because then everyone's like, hey, so-and-so, welcome to the group. They've all met them at some point, and then they're happy to join. And so it's kind of what I do is we make sure they're not surprised by getting this email from Zync saying, hey, you're now part of it. They might think it's spam. So I prepare them, hey, you're going to get this email, and this is what it's all about. We're using it, and participate as you will. Here's some expectations. You can use it on your phone, your desktop, whatever. And if you ever have any questions, let me know. So we just kind of roll them in eventually and let them know, hey, as you see it, maybe you want to build your own group. Like, hey, maybe we're going to have our own Asia group. That's fantastic. Maybe we're going to have our own European group. Wonderful. And just see where they go with it. They've really, they're starting to really build the momentum with it.
That's great. So thanks for those. It's always interesting to hear how the product gets used in different organizations. Everyone starts to have their own flavor, but there's definitely some commonalities, especially across field service teams, around a little bit of best practices around structure. Maybe you put together groups around certain product lines and it's around certain regions, and troubleshooting groups have always been really popular. Nicole, any questions from the audience?
Yeah, there was one that came in, and I know we've heard this before. Sean, have you had any issues with moderating topics or messages? I know a lot of people kind of have concerns when it's like opening up Pandora's box. How did you deal with that?
So this all goes back to the expectations, right? Because as the admin, there's groups that I create, but I cannot read conversations that employees create on their own, right? So I'm only seeing the conversations, the groups I'm in. If I'm not in those other 40 groups, I don't know what's going on, right? The analytics just tell me, okay, there's a group that's created. It's pretty popular, right? I have like one that's like, I think it's a lunch group or something, and great, fantastic. They want to have that conversation. I expect all of my employees to be responsible. If there is something inappropriate that doesn't meet our company culture and expectations, you're going to follow the proper process to address that. And I'm not looking to pry and do all that. I don't want to do that stuff. I want my employees to feel comfortable enough in a professional environment that they can have those conversations. So I don't know the conversations, and that's okay. So I think the teams appreciate that. All I just know is how many groups we have, and we also have. I think everyone should realize too that you have the flexibility to make a group, public. In other words, there's a link, so any user can invite any user. That's fine, or you can say, no, don't. I only want it to be for us 3 people, right? Maybe we're really close personal friendships, 3 of us at work. And it's just for us, and that's fine too. We did create a group that if you want to have a public group, just add links to those groups in another part of Zync. So any new employee can, oh, you know what, I want to be a part of that group, because maybe some people don't. But I'm really not trying to be Big Brother, and I don't want to be Big Brother. And I just trust my employees that if something's not meeting the expectations of the organization, we're going to follow the proper process to address it.
Yeah, and we find a lot of our customers will put together acceptable use policies along with IT, and so in that acceptable use policy, there's something that talks to about a code of behavior on these types of communication tools, and we find that it works really well, and there's a level of respect that tends to happen between the employees.
I will tell. It's funny though. Just one last thing.
Sorry, go ahead.
Kind of humorous by users. When I saw the list of all the groups, I made a reference to one, and then one of the people, as a joke, changed the name to Sean Can See Our Group Now. And that was the name of their group.
Great.
So why don't we just finish things off here with some key takeaways.
Perfect, yeah. So thanks for that presentation, Sean. I think it's perfect. I think, the themes here that we heard are, really your team should have this single communication platform. Deskless workers are really kind of clamoring for it. And so to be able to give them one place to really go to do their job is ideally what drives that engagement that you talked about. Also, storing communication data, when you have a single platform, you're able to do that and then be able to analyze it to make those decisions. Like you said, Sean, you took a look at the message volume by group and saw that there was an opportunity to maybe define some better training so that people get some help on that. You know, it's really hard to do that unless you're waiting for anecdotal feedback when you're not capturing conversations all in one place. So that would be a second one. And then just overall, you heard Sean talk about employee engagement, and certainly that affects retention. You know, employees who feel connected to other coworkers and to corporate tend to be happier, serve their customers better, and just make for better employees to your organization. So I think a platform like Zinc can really help facilitate that. So just in closing, wanted you all to know we have an ebook available. We'll be sharing it with all of our participants. It kind of gives a high-level overview about communication being elemental to your business, and just good for additional reading. Feel free to share it with your colleagues as well. So that concludes today's webinar. Again, a big thank you to Sean from BioTek. Thanks for taking the time to share your story with us. Hopefully was relevant and meaningful to others. And John, safe travels back to the Bay Area. Thanks for taking the time as well, and hope to see you on a future Zinc webcast.
Thanks, everyone.